Sunday, October 29, 2023. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Our guest today is a small business owner and non-profit leader who is seeking to unseat Republican Congressman Derek Van Orden to serve as the residents of Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District as a Democratic candidate. Rebecca Cooke, welcome to the Weekend Show. I'm always excited to talk to people who are running for Congress, like before they get caught up in that whole kind of bubble, we're a year out, right? So, you can talk maybe a little more freely. I also find that candidates, when it gets close to election day, they're like, I can't say anything that's not in my script. You don't strike me as being that type of candidate, though. So and you did try last year, and you did very well. You came in second last year, didn't you? So or last time, I should say. So you're having another stab at this. Just tell us why initially you would like to be walking the halls of Congress with the likes of George Santos and the other great stars of the current political landscape.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks in Congress that aren't really representing their districts. I grew up on a dairy farm here in Wisconsin. I've got a big agricultural background, so I grew up showing cows in 4-H, and it's a big part of who I am. And like a lot of Wisconsin farmers, we had to sell our cows because of the price of milk and competition with larger dairies. And you see all of these farms continuing to disappear. And I don't feel like folks are really advocating, for working families in a district like mine. And so that's one of the reasons why I decided to step up. One of the many reasons why I decided to step up to run, because I feel like voices for working families are really absent in Congress. How many, dairy Holstein champions, small business owning waitresses do you know in Congress? That's not really quite the resume that you see from folks. And I think, I call me old fashioned, but I think our Congress should be reflective of everyday people.
And I mean, tragically, there have been some servers. I mean, AOC was serving right up until her campaign, or certainly until she won the district, and she was actually getting criticized by her opponents for being a waitress. It's so terrible, isn't it? That the idea that we talk about this kind of American dream, and you start small and you can be anything, including a congressperson, and yet those very people are the ones to kind of criticize the journey.
Mm-hmm. There's so much dignity in hospitality work, and that was my first job when I was 16 was waitressing, and I still run a small business, but a business that I was more well known for, a retail shop I sold at the end of last cycle. And, I'm not a stranger to seeing with, rising costs post-pandemic. It's tough to make things work for a retail shop when you're competing with the Amazons of the world. And so I sold my retail shop and small business, a restaurant that was opening in my hometown. I took a job waitressing, and it's been awesome. And I think being able to really understand the challenges that a lot of my colleagues are facing, a lot of them as students or at really different phases in their lives. But also, it's kind of like you're campaigning every Friday night. I work this evening. And much of, the rest of this next week. And I think that, I'm able to talk with folks and constituents all the time. So about, I'm excited you're running. This is what I'm concerned about. Had some union workers in recently. And so it's really a gateway into a lot of that as well. So
politics has changed so much since 2016, the kind of Donald Trump effect on the whole country, this polarization, kind of hatred and enemies and scoring points and faux outrage, I think, is the one that frustrates me the most. How much of that kind of Washington drama do you feel kind of filters down to Wisconsin and to the people that you talk to? Because I mean, it's a reasonable sized district that you're running in, and arguably, it's close to Minneapolis, and yet it kind of borders two lakes, and it's kind of amazing place. But how does that kind of national politics reverberate around Wisconsin?
I spend a lot of time out in particular in rural communities around my district. So it's 19 counties. That's how large it is geographically. And last cycle in the Democratic primary, I was fortunate to win 11 out of 19 counties. And I didn't win just rural counties and communities. I won, populous places like Eau Claire and Stevens Point. But I did so well in those smaller communities, I think because we got out there and talked with folks and heard from people what it is that they're really concerned about. I think some of those national narratives do trickle down, mostly because of who our congressman is now that chooses to elevate some of those narratives. But when I'm out like at a county fair, walking through dairy and beef barns and asking people what some of their top concerns are, a lot of just the national rhetoric is not what they're necessarily bringing up to me. They're concerned about how they're going to pay their rent next month. They're concerned about childcare costs. They're concerned about the cost of healthcare, and being able to put food on their table. And so those are the types of things that I'm hearing from folks. I think that, that you hear some of that national rhetoric, but when I ask people what they're most concerned about, it's about, it's kitchen table issues and how to get by.
And the incumbent is the Republican Congressman Derek Van Orden, who is very much on the far right, it would seem,
right,
aligned with Donald Trump. He recently,
yes,
I think a couple of days ago, started screaming at somebody in the halls of Congress and
yes,
swearing and being weird. And he's just gone to Israel to kind of do a fact-finding mission or something, or he's just come back from that. There's a lot of very performative stuff going on with this guy. Part of the problem, I think, is that a lot of people get into politics for the wrong reasons. And they do it because, I don't know, power, money, attention. I mean, who knows? Do you feel that, I mean, I should also caveat that with saying that Donald Trump talked a lot about the farmers, we've got to look at after the farmers. And I personally don't believe the farmers really benefited at all from the Donald Trump presidency. Is that guy still talking that language and that rhetoric? And how can you change that?
Yeah, I certainly think he is. And Derek Van Orden's got an ego a mile wide. He's somebody also that's got a very long rap sheet. Was at the Stop the Steal rally, been considered an insurrectionist, has been at a library in our district in Prairie du Chien, harassing a young librarian over a Pride book display, carried a loaded weapon through TSA, got kind of drunk in his official office and yelled at a bunch of teenagers in our nation's capital. More recently, lashed out at White House aides during a classified Israel briefing. And so the list just goes on. And then on top of that, because he doesn't think our administration is smart enough to get it right, goes on a fact-finding mission to Israel in the middle of votes for the House Speaker.
That's right. He was the only Republican.
He was the only Republican that wasn't there because he was by himself on this rogue trip. And I don't know a lot of other folks, but, if I just left my job for a couple of weeks and didn't show up to it, I think most of us would get fired.
Yeah.
You look at, say a firefighter shows up to a fire and they're like, well, I'm out of here. I'm not going to do that. The house burns down. Right. And it's you can't show up. Leaders, when it's a time of chaos, you step up to lead, and he just left.
But a lot of Republican lawmakers are a bit like that. I mean, some of them just don't show up at all. And there is this sense of once you've got the job, then you can just it's just plain sailing from there. This idea of public service, you've talked about it a lot, and you did in your campaign last time, and you're certainly doing it again. What is that kind of it must be a very personal calling. Were you interested in politics when you were much younger, or is this something that maybe, like a lot of us, changed in 2016 when there was this rise of fascism and suddenly people's freedoms were being taken from them? And certainly for me and us here at Midas Touch, that was a great impetus to kind of do our jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been interested in being a leader in my community. I think it's just kind of come natural to me in the things that I've chosen to do with my life, I ran a small business, like I said, in my downtown community for a number of years, and it wasn't just a shop, just a retail shop. There was some components to it that I was really living out my values, right? It was a made in America store, so we sold mostly made in America goods, supporting regional and local economies, because we know that, the Amazons of the world aren't really what make our communities special. And so really supporting independent, other women in business has been important to me. And so much so that I started a nonprofit organization that supports other women entrepreneurs throughout 10 counties within the region. So that's something that I still manage and run. And so we've helped 39 businesses launch in the last 8 years, which really means something in small towns. Injecting startup capital. So that comes in the form of $2,000 grants. So we've helped rural mental health clinics get open, independent bookstores, restaurants, including the restaurant that I'm now working at. Because it's not the Dollar General that's at the end of a road in a small town that makes a community special. It's really those businesses that create long standing, legacies within their communities and create jobs and don't just go when things are tough. And so I've been leading in my community for a long time. And that's just been something like when you see a problem or you see a gap, it's been instinctual to want to fill it. And I was raised that way, I think, to show up for your neighbors, when times are tough and whether that's bringing a meal over when somebody's sick or, pitching a hand when somebody's cows are all out, that's the way that I was raised. And I think we need more people that look at Congress for what it was truly meant to be, as a public service and really showing up every day to work for your constituents. And when I get elected, I want to run a really strong constituent-centered office that has caseworkers on staff, that even has maybe my chief of staff based in district, because you can get so much more done, And so I look at the job like that. I don't look at it as some resume builder or, like Derek Van Orden, he's an actor, author, and a congressman seems like another feather in his hat. Like this is for the limelight and the gusto. It's not, to help seniors be able to afford their prescription drugs. It's not to increase the federal minimum wage so that working families can afford their groceries, right? So
I've often thought that Republicans, especially in rural areas, don't realize that they're voting for the wrong team in terms of what will benefit them directly. And it's almost as if this kind of tribalism overpowers the desire to really think about what will benefit them and who's looking out for them. Do you think people understand that actually in rural America, certainly in the Midwest, that the likes of the incumbent don't really have any interest in connecting with the people and doing the work for the people. And actually it might require voters to switch teams in order to get something for themselves.
I think that's one thing that I'm always careful of. I think when you say, like as far as like, well, folks don't know enough or, why aren't they voting? And that kind of calls on, well, that means they're not educated enough or something. And that's not the case. I think what's happened really in a lot of parts of rural America is as a party, Democrats haven't been showing up there. I think they've taken for granted the rural vote, that for a long time, rural America is a lot of working class folks, right? And so showing up there, the value of showing up is so important, and not writing any place off, just to say, well, that's too red. We're not going to go there. We're not going to campaign there because they're all just going to vote for a Republican anyways. That's when you have that kind of attitude, it's so defeatist, and it also just, people aren't hearing your ideas. And so that's what was so important to me, was getting out to rural communities, places that, when I walk through a county dairy barn or a beef barn as a politician, I think people are very surprised, like, what am I doing there? And I think the way that we kind of like bridge the gap is like more storytelling and more value-based conversations, and that we're at such, and you know this well, I mean, everybody knows this well, when you look at the national stage, we're at such a hyper-polarized place in our country right now, and people are in their camps and no one wants to find common ground. no one in Congress, and in some places, people have a really hard time just even talking about their political beliefs. And so if you can disarm folks by just talking about what they care about, I think there's a lot of value in that. And I'll give you an example. So there's a Richland County. It's a small rural county in my district. I was down there, and the Democrats always want you to come and stand at the booth in the expo center. And you're like, no one's going to come up and talk to me. People are at the fair to drink milkshakes and eat cheese curds and to go on rides. They don't want to talk about politics, but it's the best time to be able to have conversations, in particular with farmers, because where are they most of the time? They're working on their farm. So I'm able to go around and introduce myself, and I'll say, hi, I'm Rebecca Cooke. I grew up on a dairy farm. I used to show cattle just like you, and I'm running for office. And I think people are like, okay, you're running for office and you're out here in the beef barn right now.
Yeah.
And I'm able to have more conversations that I don't lead with I'm a Democrat. I learned that the hard way. We have things called dairy breakfast here in Wisconsin as well that I'd work. There's hundreds of people that go to them. So you'd work those lines. And the first time I ever went, I said, hi, I'm Rebecca Cooke and I'm a Democrat. They just walked right past me. But if I can lead with that, a lot of times I get into these conversations, if I can lead with just my background and who I am and my working class identity, people are willing to have a conversation. And at the end of it, they go, so what party are you from again? And I'd rather that we get to that place where we can have conversations around ideas and pull people together and build a bigger tent and find more common ground.
It's so important, isn't it? I mean, it goes back to this tribalism thing that, people are voting against their own interests, really, because they feel, whether it be through hereditary voting, my parents voted Republican, so therefore I should too. And I think a lot of that still goes on. And actually the reality of getting a representative who actually, it's a bit like the abortion debate, right? I mean, nationally, when you poll the country, people are supportive of women's health care into quite a significant majority. And yet in the Republican Party, there's just no acknowledgement of that. And in fact, I heard the new Speaker of the House being interviewed about this on Fox a couple of days ago. And he was just like, nah, I'm not even going to talk about that. It was like an issue that he didn't want to go to. He was pleased that Roe had been overturned. It'd been thrown to the states. He'd got what he wanted effectively. And he just kind of kicked it into the long grass. That issue particularly is one that you've spoken about before. And obviously the overturning of Roe was a seismic shift for women and everybody, right? Because it wound America's clock back 50 years. How did you feel about that, and how much of that subject affects your campaign?
Yeah, that happened right in the middle of my campaign last cycle. And I was out there rallying with folks in my community, helped to organize some actions around that. And it's something that I'm continuing to hear from folks. It's a top motivator for people to get to the ballot box. And you saw that, we had a Supreme Court race here in Wisconsin this spring, and that being a main issue that justice was running on, that was more of a liberal progressive, justice. And this district that I'm in went for her. And that tells you that people are motivated by that issue. And Republicans like to talk a lot about freedoms, but one of the freedoms that they don't talk about is reproductive freedoms. And I don't think that it's my, job to be in a doctor's office making a decision with a woman and her partner and their physician about what she wants to do with her own body. I have somebody that I went to high school with here in Eau Claire, and she had to make that decision, had a planned pregnancy with her husband, expecting a child, had some complications in labor. And, that doctor had to stop when this was already a very traumatic situation and make a phone call to find out whether or not he could have that procedure and do an abortion, perform an abortion. I mean, what a traumatic thing that a doctor can't do his job and help to save this woman's life, right?
He's frightened of going to prison. I mean, this
exactly,
is the
and that's what the state
Yeah.
in Wisconsin, we revert back to this 1849 law that is just draconian. And it's impacting women every day here in Wisconsin. So that's something, and I think, Anthony, you'll talk to lots of different people, but every Democrat will be talking about this and campaigning on this issue going into.
Well, it was certainly an issue that helped the Democrats in the midterms, and it was definitely it's definitely kind of the issue, I think, going into 2024, because the language and the rhetoric, and just to go back to this new House Speaker. Is his name Mike Johnson? He has one of those names that is instantly forgettable, right?
It's
like
yes.
I'll never
very
remember
vanilla.
that name. Right,
Vanilla Mike Johnson.
Vanilla Mike Johnson.
Yeah.
That actually, on this subject and so many others associated, the far right and Christian nationalists tend to kind of adopt. He's a bit of a Trojan horse because he presents very well. He's a very good talker. He's got a full head of hair. He talks the talk, but actually the rhetoric is very dangerous. And I would just quote him from this Fox interview where he said, well, when people want to know what my views are because they don't know me, I tell them, just read the Bible. Read the Bible and you'll see what all my views are. This kind of idea of Christian nationalism. I'm not talking about moderate Christianity. And this is something I had to learn as a European moving to the US, is that when someone says they're a Christian, they're really a Christian. Whereas in the Europe and certainly in the UK, if you say you're a Christian, it means, well, you're not really necessarily a believer and you certainly don't go to church, but it's very different in the US. How much is that kind of religious aspect something that you're having to navigate as a candidate, and is that a big part of kind of community thinking?
Yeah, I think I'm somebody that does identify as a Christian, and I think a lot of some of those things that we talked about earlier, being a servant leader, kind of came out of some of my time, in going to church and how do you show up for your neighbors and. And so I do hear, and this is a district that is home to people of a lot of different faiths, but it is a very Christian, district. And I think one of the things that's been frustrating to me is the way in which the Republican Party tries to weaponize religion and pit people together or against one another because of their faith. There's lots of Christians that are Democrats. And it feels like it's another thing that they've co-opted, in the same that they've co-opted, like the Freedom Caucus should not be called the Freedom Caucus, the Treasonous Caucus maybe, but freedom, it's just, they've taken some of these words, they've taken faith, they've taken freedom, they've taken some of this and made it their own. Yeah. Yes. But you know what? You can love freedom as much as I do, and I'm a Democrat. And you can love your faith and your church family as much as I do, and being a Democrat, and so I think, I think it's frustrating to hear how they've done that. And I also, I read the same Bible, and I have very different, beliefs and value systems. And so there's a lot to interpretation there.
Well, you can love thy neighbor and be a secular person. I mean, that's the reality of a modern society, is that right. People should be able to practice whatever they want, just not impose it on others. And I think it's that separation of church and state which has changed so much with this new Freedom Caucus and MAGA Republicans in Congress, where they really do feel that the Christian faith should be the kind of dominant faith of politics and of society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I'm also a very strong believer of, my faith it's something that drives me personally. It's not something I push upon other folks. And separation of church and state is one of the reasons why our country was founded. So
that guy's name, what is it, Mike Johnson, he would argue this case with you. I actually saw a clip of him arguing this. He actually doesn't believe in the separation of church and state. And he believes that the state was founded on kind of biblical terms. That is the new rhetoric coming out of
Interesting.
Congress. I mean, that's the lion's den that you'd be getting yourself into if you are successful next year.
Yeah. Well, I'm prepared to take folks on. I think that he's got to do some further reading. So that's what he believes.
Yeah. Okay. We need to take a quick pause for our sponsor, but I want to come back and talk more about kind of rural America and how it differs to, say, the coasts, for example, here on The Weekend Show. Did you know that your temperature at night can have one of the greatest impacts on your sleep quality? If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Inspired by NASA, Miracle Made uses silver-infused fabrics and makes temperature-regulating bedding so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. Using silver-infused fabrics originally inspired by NASA, Miracle Made sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long, so you get a better sleep every night. These sheets are infused with silver that prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, leaving them to stay cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets. No more gross odors. Miracle sheets are luxuriously comfortable without the high price tag of other luxury brands and feel as nice, if not nicer, than bed sheets used by some 5-star hotels. Stop sleeping on bacteria. Bacteria can clog your pores, causing outbreaks and acne. Sleep clean with Miracle. Go to trymiracle.com/weekend to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code WEEKEND at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/weekend and use the code WEEKEND to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. That's trymiracle.com/weekend to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. Heart health and staying healthy, especially when you have a family that you want to be able to spend as much time with as possible, is so important. We have a heartfelt reason to support our blood pressure. In fact, more than half the US population would benefit from blood pressure support. Well, Superbeats Heart Chews are an easy and convenient way to support healthy blood pressure, and they promote heart-healthy energy. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in Superbeats are clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. And with over 30,000 5-star reviews and counting, Superbeats Heart Chews are having their moment. Superbeats Heart Chews are incredibly delicious and so much better than any alternative supplements out there. I take my Superbeats Heart Chews each morning and it's really kick-started my morning routine. After taking Superbeats Heart Chews, I feel like I have more energy and I'm ready to take on the day. Superbeats Heart Chews support healthy circulation, so you not only get blood pressure support, you also get productive, heart-healthy energy without the crash. Double your potential with Superbeats Heart Chews. Get a free 30-day supply of Superbeats Heart Chews and 15% off your first order by going to getsuperbeats.com and using promo code WEEKEND. That's superbeets.com, code WEEKEND. We're back with the Weekend Show and Rebecca Cooke, who is running for Congress and hoping to unseat a far-right Republican character. Who, did you say he was an actor and an artist and a congressman?
An author.
An author.
He wrote a book. It was called How to Be a Man, a Navy SEAL's guide.
That's so good. I should just ask you about the kind of gender thing, because This is something that I think about all the time. And I think of myself as a feminist. I was brought up by a single mum. And I just see that men have kind of ruined everything in recent decades. And in countries where there are female leaders, they seem to be kind of just doing a little better or getting on with things or have more of a civilized society. How do you feel about the reaction you get to your gender, and is that something that still is a problem in rural America?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. This district is also, I will say, has never had a woman represented. So this would be pretty historical winning.
Case in point, right?
Yes. I think that what folks are looking for most is, some authenticity. And I think that that's something that I bring in my ability to be able to talk with people. And I don't know if that has to do with being a woman necessarily, but I think it's just the way in which I approach issues. It's the way in which I approach conflict. It's the way in which I talk to people that think differently than me. And that's what it's going to take to be able to flip this seat. I mean, it's a very small fraction of voters that we've got to encourage to vote for me that are swing voters, independents, moderate Republicans, but I've got that kind of message that I think transcends party lines. And I think, utilizing my story, my lived experiences, I think what's really going to be helpful. And I think being a young woman also strikes a strong contrast with somebody like Derek Van Orden, and when you look also at our Congress nowadays, this is the oldest Congress that we've ever had in the history of our country. And I think we're due and ready for fresh leadership. And someone like me is going to be able to help motivate and encourage, especially young people, and particularly young women that are motivated by choice to come out to vote. And that's not going to just support me, but the road to the White House is through Wisconsin 3. So having people like myself on the ballot is only going to help the entire ticket and help to get, Senator Tammy Baldwin reelected. And so I think there's so many advantages to that, and kind of what I represent and who I am as a person. Some of that being that I'm a young woman, but yeah.
I think it's undoubtedly in this, as hopefully, I always think that society is moving on and that we're making progress all the time, and then Roe gets overturned, or then a far right Christian nationalist insurrectionist gets voted House Speaker, and I'm like, ugh, and this is the frustration with the U.S. Why do you think it is the case that there is this desire by so many in America to kind of go back to the 1950s? Those kind of traditional roles and women in the kitchen and men doing the hunting and the gathering. I mean, it's so antiquated, and the rest of the world, and I'm thinking mainly from a European perspective, it doesn't even consider those ideals. And yet there's something about that 1950s kind of picket fence American dream that a lot of voters just hark back to.
I think there's I feel like a really fear of change, right? And right. I also feel like in the way some of these issues are talked about, on the main stage, there's a lot of fear mongering that goes on and making things seem even scarier or crazier than what they really are. Yeah. And I think that really distracts voters from things that they really care about, right? I mean, a lot of these fear tactics, mostly that Republicans use, makes people want to hold on to something that's familiar and not want to have change, not want to, change what our healthcare system looks like, for example. My parents are older, they're in their 70s. They go to Mexico once a year. That's their once a year vacation that they take. And they get their dental work done there because it's cheaper to do there than it is in our own country. But then when you talk about Medicare, Republicans want to take that away. I want to expand Medicare to cover vision, dental, and hearing, the things that deteriorate as folks age, so that our parents and our family and our grandparents can age with dignity. And I'll tell you that socialized medicine is the thing that, Republicans say all the time when I'm out, an example, again, I was out at a fair talking with a young guy. And when I first approached him, handing out my literature, I handed it to him. I'm running for office. I used to grow up, I grew up on a dairy farm, used to show cattle. And he said, well, what are you? And I said, what am I? What do you mean? And he said, Democrat or Republican? And I said, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a good one. And he handed my literature right back to me. And I said, hey, you haven't even listened to what I've had to say yet. And I said, my parents, I gave that same story. And he said, well, yeah, that just makes sense. And he, took my let back and we had a deeper conversation. But he's somebody that identified with this idea of, kind of wanting to drain the swamp and that Washington wasn't working for us. And so, I think that kind of like narrative that I have to offer with folks, I think is going to help bring people across the aisle. So, yeah.
Because those phrases that he's saying are Republican talking points that get said on Fox News, that Donald Trump repeats ad infinitum at rallies, the draining the swamp. In fact, he gets everyone chanting it, right?
Yes.
When in fact, he really is the swamp monster.
He's a swamp.
As we've discovered,
He's a
right?
swamp monster.
Yeah.
And so is somebody like Derek. He's not there advocating to lower prescription drug prices. He's taking that big money. My campaign is really people powered. Like, I'm going to be there to work for people. And I think like helping folks realize that it's not, government isn't all bad. It's who we're sending there to run it.
Yeah.
And we need to have...
government is people, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
At the end of the day, it's just people. Without the people, it doesn't exist.
Right. And so like, I think that's a lot of the conversations that I'm trying to have are around ideas and are around things that are really impacting folks, to bring those walls down and to feel less afraid of what I think the right is putting out there, to make people build walls up and not be open to change in policy and open to how it's always been, because how it's always been in a lot of different instances is not working.
You also have, as a senator, Ron Johnson, the delightful creature he is. That, he obviously represents that kind of Donald Trumpism and fascism, and is kind of anti-everything as far as I'm concerned. But, he's in quite a strong position and always seems to be. And a lot of these old white guys, they're very much dug in, aren't they, in terms of in their back home and in Washington.
Yeah, I'm somebody that would love to see a Congress more reflective of me. I think some of the people in Congress that I really admire right now are folks like Marie Glussenkamp-Perez, Mary Peltola, Jared Golden, kind of these more working class representatives, come from backgrounds where they've gotten their hands dirty. They know what it's like to run a business. They know what it's like to, run a fishing operation. They're rooted in their communities. And so, I think that's kind of the difference. And I think that's what people are going to be looking for as we look to find the people that are doers, that are going to take us out of some of this chaos position that we're in now, to really make change in our country and to get us back on course.
Because we all want the same thing, really, at the end of the day, don't we? I mean, it's just the tribalism that separates us. But fundamentally, we just want to be listened to. We want to be heard. We want to be held. I think, humanity is the same the world over. Yeah. And yet borders and religions and the tribalism of politics is what kind of makes people feel like they are different. But I've certainly learned that actually fundamentally we're all the same. How do you break through that, bearing in mind that, and I want to talk about the difference between the rural and the urban, because so much of the media comes from the coasts, right? You have certainly all of the coverage. You have the media elite. A lot of the people that write the articles are white and wealthy, otherwise they wouldn't be able to afford an apartment in New York if they didn't have family money. They're certainly not paying for it with their journalism salary, you see. So, a lot of that, I analyze that stuff a lot, and it does concern me that so much of the writing and the thinking, the rhetoric of the media is it's not going to change, and it often does not report on those local stories and what rural America is about. And it's very much two Americas, isn't it? And do you see it like that? Do you see those kind of coastal America versus middle America? And do you get a sense that we need to, or you need to do something significant to really kind of break down those differences?
Yeah, I think that there's something that to politics nowadays, and it's more about class. You look at who's able to run for office, who's able to hold those positions, and it's people that are wealthier and because they have the money to fund a campaign. Somebody like me that is waitressing in the evenings, running another small business, running a nonprofit, and then campaigning, 7 days a week, basically. You don't see that very often. You see a lot of folks that are retired or come from family money. And so you see a Congress that's been built to be more elitist in nature. And I think there's a lot of resent that people have in middle America and, for what Congress looks like, because it's no longer reflective of people. And so, you definitely hear that. And that is the sentiment, I think. And that's where it is breaking through and being a really strong representative and helping bring people along in those conversations. And I think that's a huge part of my job, is to making people feel seen and heard and felt and reflected within their government. And that takes time. I mean, you're talking more about like the news media in some of these places.
Well, it filters through, doesn't it? And it means that even the news isn't reflecting how people feel in rural America, because the news invariably is just coming from the coasts. And so there is this chasm, where I recognize that people don't just feel underrepresented, but they also feel ignored because the media isn't talking about the things that they need and they care about.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, and what can we do to change that? It's tough because you look at the way that journalism has consolidated, much like many of our industries have consolidated. My sister was a reporter went to journalism and has kind of changed jobs. She now works for the teachers union in Minnesota. I come from a union family. And that's changed so much because there weren't print journalism jobs, like that's our hyper local ability to be able to tell the stories of communities has changed because of the way in which people are able to get access to it, right? And have jobs that pay people to tell the stories of everyday folks. And so you see this kind of consolidation happening, not just in journalism, but in so many different industries, like with the ag industry. You've got four main beef processors. Which is crazy.
Yeah, and brewers as well.
Brewers as well.
Beer
However,
comes out of Wisconsin.
Yes, a lot of beer comes out of Wisconsin. However, one thing that I like to say about the brewing industry that has been phenomenal is the way that so many microbreweries and smaller brewers have been able to break out and then build these economies that help, employ small towns, create this whole other piece of commerce. So I think there's like a silver lining to that, to the story of breweries, is that this kind of microbrewery space that people have been able to break through. But, there's so many other industries that are so consolidated, and enforcing antitrust laws, I think is so important. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be focused on when I'm in Congress. It's not about, lining your pockets with special interest dollars and lobbying dollars, but it's like, how are we taking on some of these folks that are really, in a lot of ways, price gouging consumers? My dad was diagnosed with cancer here a couple of months ago, and that's been really tough for our family for a lot of different reasons. He went in to get his prescription drugs for the first time, a $1,300 copay, which is just insane. And he's getting his medication now through Mark Cuban's, business that like subsidizes pharmaceutical drugs. That's what my dad is doing because of how broken our healthcare system is.
That $1,300
and pharmaceutical
was that for like a 3-month supply or a 1-month supply? What was that for?
I'm not sure for how long it was.
That's
but I think
concern,
it was,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Just on that subject, and I'm very sorry about your father, but I recognize that, for example, capping the cost of insulin at $35, which is a Joe Biden initiative. Mm-hmm. Every Republican voted against that. And this is the thing about healthcare that I find so interesting, especially from someone who comes from a country with socialized medicine, which we don't call it that, by the way. That phrase, I don't know where that came from, but we don't call it that. Just go to the doctor, nobody charges you. And if you came to the UK and you needed to go to the doctor, they wouldn't charge you either. They wouldn't ask you for your credit card or anything. It just it works. It's not perfect, but it works. This idea of voting against your own interests because there are Republicans who have diabetes, right? This is what I don't understand.
But they've got Cadillac healthcare.
Right. So this is what I want to ask you. Like, what is it that prevents Republicans from voting for something as important and as universal as capping the cost of insulin at $35? It should be free, right? Let's just make that point. It shouldn't cost anything. $35 is too much in my view. But what is the mentality of lawmakers that are doing that? And how did it make you feel when you heard that that's what was happening?
A couple different things I kind of think and feel in reacting to that. I think there's so much placed when you get to DC, and like this was obviously an interview, so this will be forever, in the books what I say about this. But yeah. I'm never going to be influenced by money. You can hold that over my head my whole life. And I think so many folks are influenced by special interest dollars. And then just the ego of getting reelected and having power, and how do you keep that? And who funds the Republican Party? And how does money roll in to, from pharmaceutical companies? And I think they're so beholden to that and so lost in some of that power and being lockstep with their party that they lose sight of who really elected them there and what for, and it's infuriating to me. To see bills like that come through and have that opportunity to really improve people's lives. That's what I think, being a member of Congress is about, is how do I improve the quality of life for the people I'm serving? Man, insulin caps at $35. Oh, that would be great, And so
but you would be called radical, me. You'd be called a radical snowflake Democrat, they'd be. And this is the thing that I don't really understand, because to me, I can't see that there is such thing as a radical Democrat, because, I come from Europe where we believe in climate change, and we believe that the pandemic was real and was, an accident. And unfortunately, the narrative in the US is very different to that. And so really, so many people have become radicalized by this right-wing rhetoric, and it's so hard because it's broken families up. People can't have conversations like you and I are having now. They just can't have kind of moderate conversations because they're just so brainwashed.
Well, I think, and here's where somebody asked me at an event recently, they said, I've got a sister, she's a nurse, and she's somewhat more progressive. Doesn't talk about it much. People don't always talk about it lots in smaller communities. And she said, I've got this, brother-in-law that's a dairy farmer, and I want to have conversations with him, but like, how do I break through, or how do I even be able to start to begin some of those conversations? And I think that it is about helping people identify within someone's story, like, what do they care about? What are things that are impacting their lives? And that's why the way in which I talk a lot about issues, I've kind of told a few different stories on here about my family around healthcare. I haven't talked very much about minimum wage, but maybe I will. But when you can talk about it, like, I'm a waitress, the tip minimum wage in Wisconsin is $2.33 an hour. The minimum wage in Wisconsin is $7.25 an hour. And when you talk with folks, when you talk about work and what they're making, I think when you can start to dig into people's personal stories and think about what motivates them, who they are, and then talk about issues in a way that they can really resonate with them. Sometimes people just tune out when they think about politics and policy. They're like, I'm not into politics, when everything is politics.
That's
like,
right.
Do you care about your health care?
Yeah, I hear that.
Do you care about your health care? Are you looking for affordable housing? Would you like a pay increase? There's so much that if we can elect the right folks that are helping guide that and improving the outcomes for their districts, we'd be in such a better place if that's what people were truly focused on,
Isn't it crazy that people don't know what politics is, therefore? It's like they've blocked out politics.
They're like, that thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, this is why I am surprised that more people, especially in rural areas, are not activated. And is it any wonder that if a character, a populist like Donald Trump says, well, those politicians are all corrupt. Don't worry, I've got you. I'll take care of all your problems. Just trust me. And that people do, that people are drawn to someone who is offers a solution without any detail.
But I think voters in rural areas are activated, but if you're not there giving an antidote or an option of something different, like Republicans have gone and done a good job of really getting into rural communities and connecting with people, because rural Democrats are very engaged, but it's talking more about policy and then who you can attribute to that. Like that young man that when I talked about Medicare expansion was very excited about that.
Yeah.
Well, then you might want to start to vote for some Democrats because they'll help make that a reality for you, but being able to tell those stories. And I think in hearing other people's stories and talking, about what are your challenges, what kind of challenges are you facing, and hearing those things, and then being able to talk about what the solutions are. So many people also and just run campaigns that are like, this person's bad, that's why you should vote for me.
Yeah.
And if you look at my priorities page that's on my website, I wrote that in my own words. It's not one of my DC consultants. That was something that I wrote in a way that connects with people and that resonates with folks, and that's in plain language. That's like, it's not vague by any means. And so I think that that's what's important. And I think being able to break that down, storytelling is something that sometimes people don't do well, but I think that that's the way policy breaks through to have such strong outcomes.
Last week, the Wisconsin Farmers Union president, Darren von Ruden, ripped into your opponent, Van Orden, for the congressman's record of prioritizing the wealthy and big corporations. That's how he described it. I mean, this is something that obviously, we've talked a little about this, but it's almost like a congressperson feels like their job becomes keeping their job and making as much money as they can. And as you say, losing sight of the reason they got elected. How do you plan on, taking on these types of lobby groups? Because, a lot of it, we've seen it with the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who was just forgiven a $250,000 loan for an RV. Everyone has their price, it seems. So how do you prevent the lobbyists from kind of infiltrating you or brainwashing you or kind of captivating you with their great riches?
Well, I have a conscience,
and
and I was raised just a different way, I see that there's some leaders. I had mentioned kind of a group of folks that aren't beholden to special interests that are really taking to task, like these folks that are trying to be influential in that way with their dollars. Right. And so, that's a commitment I'm making of not taking dollars like that to, I just think that that's what dilutes our democracy in so many ways. Is it's not your representatives. You're really represented by like pharmaceutical companies or big ag, or that's who really represents you if you start to take those dollars, and so that's not something that I intend to do or be wooed into doing. And I think that the voters of this district will see the results when I'm a member of Congress. And I'm not worried about reelection in a way that I would compromise my values for that, where I think my results will speak for themselves. And that's what will continue to motivate people to support me. But I'm a big believer in term limits as well. We talked a little bit about this, about what our Congress looks like and ushering in another generation. And I think that it's important to come in with a clear focus and an idea of what you hope to accomplish for your district and for your constituents, how you intend to run a constituent-centered office and do those things and pass a baton. I think that's also a very healthy part of our democracy. I think 2 years is a very short time. If there was one thing I might think about changing is having, 4-year terms. So you aren't always continuing to run for Congress, because that's what it does seem that it is like. Yeah. But I think that there's a lot of opportunities to make gains where it's not like, I want to see change in campaign finance laws for a number of reasons, but also it isn't just this cycle of fundraising, but that we do change things. So we also have a Congress that's more reflective. We have different types of people running for office, folks with working class backgrounds like mine that are able to step in and do the right thing. So
we have to take another quick pause for our sponsor, but I want to come back and talk about the mass shooting we've seen in Maine and the attitude of Wisconsins towards gun ownership and gun control. next on The Weekend Show.
Did you know that poor sleep can cause weight gain, mood issues, poor mental health, and lower productivity? Sleep is the foundation of our mental and physical health and performance in our days. Having a consistent nighttime routine is non-negotiable. When I don't get enough sleep, trust me, you don't want to be around me the next day. Introducing Beam Dream. You know we've been raving about Beam's Dream Powder, their healthy hot cocoa for sleep. And today our listeners get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder, their best-selling healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Now available in delicious flavors like sea salt caramel, cinnamon cocoa, and chocolate peanut butter. Better sleep has never tasted better. Dream contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, melatonin, and nano CBD to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. A recent clinical study revealed Dream helped 93% of users wake up feeling more refreshed, and 93% reported that Dream helped them get a more restful night's sleep. Just mix Beam Dream into hot water or milk, stir or froth, and enjoy before bedtime. I've personally tried Beam Dream, and it lived up to the hype. Beam Dream is delicious and just a wonderful nighttime routine. Also, and most importantly, it helped me fall asleep and stay asleep. The next day I woke up ready and eager to take on all of life's challenges and tasks. Find out why Forbes and New York Times are all talking about Beam and why it's trusted by the world's top athletes and business professionals. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder and take advantage of their biggest sale of the year and get up to 50% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/weekend and use cyber at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/weekend and use code CYBER for up to 50% off.
We're back with congressional candidate Rebecca Cooke here on The Weekend Show. The gun debate in America is one that is doesn't seem to change really. You know, the Republicans are very staunch in their views that they don't want any kind of further legislation. They think that what we have is enough, and personal freedom. You should be able to own a gun even if it's a weapon of war. And the AR-15 seems to be responsible, or that type of weapon seems to be responsible for all of the mass shootings that are so many people being killed, and 18 people have died in Maine as a result of a mass shooting, another mass shooting, the 35th, I think, this year. This does not happen in any other country, not any other country to this extent. It just doesn't happen. And so therefore it is very obvious to anybody who takes an interest in this subject that the problem is access to firearms. How much of this is an issue in Wisconsin politically, and how do you feel that you have to play a kind of a game of cat and mouse to communicate this? And if a Republican said to you, well, what's your feeling on guns, and are you going to take my guns away? How do you answer?
I address it head on. I don't do any cat and mouse or dance around game whatsoever. I was at a big union hall meeting last cycle, and somebody asked me that, and there's a lot of folks that hunt that are a part of all different parts of populations, but hunting is a big part of our heritage here in Wisconsin. And I've been at a deer camp myself before, and I know that, and those are traditions that I think are also important to protect. But, the first thing I said to that guy, I said, despite popular beliefs, I'm not here to take your guns away. But what I am here is to make sure that folks are able to purchase guns that are responsible gun owners, in the same way that I know that you're a responsible gun owner, that we enforce red flag laws so that folks that aren't, a harm to themselves or others aren't able to purchase firearms. And that's one of the things I think we saw with Maine is there aren't any red flag laws there. Being able to put that up when somebody is in, a mental health crisis, or somebody has been a repeat abuser, having universal background checks. I mean, it's just common sense. I was talking to a young woman she said, this is another county fair story. I guess I'll just tell you all the county fair stories because it brings out everybody. But she stopped by the Democratic booth in this rural county, Pierce County. And she said, I'm homeschooled. She was with a bunch of friends. And she said, and I don't think anything on that list. I said, do you want to vote for what issues are most important to you? And she's like, well, none of those are. And I said, you're not, your healthcare isn't important to you? And we, got into this conversation. And when we started to talk about gun reform, and I brought up those two very pieces, I said, I'm an advocate for universal background checks because folks with a criminal background, I don't want to get, guns in the hands of, right? And she said, well, yeah, that just makes sense. And it's these things where it's just like that. It's like these aha moments. Yeah. But it's so pragmatic, and it's so, it seems so like such an easy thing we should be able to do, yet it's such a divisive thing. And I think that there's so many gun owners that believe in these same things, having universal background checks, enforcing red flag laws, and having them all around our country is important so that weapons don't get in the hands of folks that are going to use them in an ill way, and the way that we've been continuing to see throughout this entire country.
But the problem is there's already 400 million AR-15 style automatic weapons out in society, and so it's almost too far gone. And in fact, a lot of these religious right organizations, they also own gun manufacturers. The NRA still wields so much power, and this idea of like protecting yourself in case there's an uprising. I mean, there was an uprising on the 6th of January, of course, and if that's not an example of which team should have the guns, I don't know what is. But it seems to me that it's a subject that lawmakers have just kind of wiped their hands with because it's too divisive.
But it shouldn't be.
Of course not. I mean, it should be common sense, but it's a bit like...
And when you talk with most gun owners, they agree with you.
Right.
And so this is more of that, like, who's the loudest in the room and the fear tactics, right? It's that your community isn't safe, so you need to have a gun to protect you, and it's not, and it's just kind of continuing to rile that piece up, and saying even things like, well, Democrats are going to take your guns. That's not true. Democrats want responsible gun ownership in the same way that gun owners see that and understand that and want that as well.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's like who's the loudest voice in the room is what everybody hears. And I think continuing to get people elected that want to see changes for responsible gun ownership is important. And not talking about it, about gun elimination in general, like you said, that's not a reality. But we've got to do something because, we all know this, the times for thoughts and prayers are over.
Yeah.
And these are two pragmatic, thoughtful things that we can do right now that can change. I mean, you look at who that active shooter was in Maine, and there was a rap sheet of a million reasons why he shouldn't have been able to purchase a firearm.
Yeah. A weapons ban was in place and it expired, and mass shootings went up 225%. I mean, it's not difficult, is it, to know that, these laws will make a difference. But what is it, the mentality, this is what I can't understand, maybe you can explain, like the mentality of Republicans who, even seeing the effect of a mass shooting in a school where children are executed and massacred, even that is not an emotional enough subject for them to be like, yeah, absolutely, we need to ban assault weapons. Because, I mean, we had a mass shooting in a school in Scotland decades ago, Dunblane, and they banned all guns within a week. Because it's emotionally, your conscience as a human is such that you cannot fathom the idea that a gun is more important than the life of a child. And yet for some reason in the US, even if it's kids, nope, still not doing it. It's to me, it's a lack of humanity, and it means that America is an uncivilized country because of it. Just tell me how you feel about that.
I think, you bring up a good question. It's so clear. Why wouldn't we call for change in this and reform? And it seems like people are just desensitized. I mean, it's so commonplace now, the mass shootings that we're seeing, that it just seems like folks are desensitized to what's happening. And I think you see Republicans continue to spin up pieces around like gun legislation, and that, well, then we need more guns to protect ourselves. And it's just this fear tactics and continuing to pit people against one another. That is why we're not getting anywhere in this conversation. And I think that the gun lobby has an incredible influence, incredible dollars that, again, representatives are beholden to and looking to stay in power and to be reelected. But that's not what most voters are looking for. Universal background checks is something that universally people want, and it's not an unpopular thing. And so it is maddening. I mean, and when you bring this up and the way in which it does seem so like black and white, that it just should be something that we should move forward with. It's a hard question to answer, because it's become so commonplace, as a young person growing up. Columbine was, for me, one of the first mass shootings that I really remember, and thinking about how scary that was, but now it's even to a point, we were doing tornado fire drills. We never did active shooter fire drill, or active shooter drills, but that's the way that people are being raised in our country right now, is that this is commonplace, and there's no leaders that are stepping up to lead, to make these changes. And that's why we need new leadership. That's why we need new folks in Congress that are reflective of our communities, that are going to do the right thing.
We touched on January 6th earlier. Let's just talk about that finally. The idea that somehow people were brainwashed into thinking that the election was stolen, even though there were over 60 court cases saying that it wasn't, and that they were driven to storm the U.S. Capitol. I mean, as a visual, for me, that was one of the most kind of dramatic and historic moments in American political history, if not the most, and I'm sure for you and most other people too. But there are still millions of Americans who think that it was the right thing to do, that the election was stolen, that Joe Biden's not the legitimate president, that Donald Trump is still the president, and they just won't have it. They won't hear of it. Do you come up against that in Wisconsin? Do you hear those views? And how did you feel on Jan 6, but also, going forward? How do we avoid this kind of information warfare that causes people to do crazy things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our country is an intense crossroads right now, in being able to defend our democracy and protect elections, and election integrity. And I watched the documentary that I think was on HBO that I cried.
Yeah, it was very powerful.
It was very, and it was just gut wrenching in so many ways. It was very powerful. And to know that I'm running against somebody that was at the Stop the Steal rally, that had a special earpiece in, that was there encouraging that kind of violence, and is not who we are as Western Wisconsinites. And I know that. The people that I talked to saw what happened on January 6th, and that disgusts them. The people that I know believe in our institutions. And I think that that's why it's so important to, speak truth to a lot of the things that are being peddled, I think, through misinformation channels, and why the power of the media is more important than ever, and being able to get the truth out there, to have, truth tellers that are helping to inform people. And so, I think with somebody like Derek, who's continuing to perpetuate, I think, misinformation, continuing to, stand by being, at the Stop the Steal rally. It's like, that is not somebody that we want representing us here in this region. And so and I know that there's other people that are running for Congress or have run for Congress or, are serving in Congress that were participated in that. And that's not what our country's foundation was built upon. And so I believe that now more than ever, continuing to protect election integrity is going to be very, very important. And that's something that I'm going to be fighting for and talking a lot about out on the campaign trail with people.
Are Wisconsin people conscious of the court cases that are going on with Donald Trump? Do they know that Sidney Powell and Ken Cheeseborough and Mark Meadows are flipping on Trump? They've pleaded guilty. Jenna Ellis pleading guilty to election, trying to overturn the election. I mean, are they aware that this stuff is happening and that one by one, everyone in Trump's orbit is basically either, taking a plea deal or acknowledging their guilt? Is that cutting through?
I think people are aware to an extent. I mean, there's so much that's happening in a chaotic space with the Republican Party on the national stage right now between Donald Trump and, everything that's been going on there, but also with the speakership. You have all of these different pieces that it's almost like who's doing their job. It's like, what are the people in Washington do? Like, what's happening? I think people continue to just kind of think, oh, that's a crazy mess. I've got a lot to figure out here. I've got kids to raise. I've got a job to go to. I've got food to put on the table. But I think it's continuing to draw attention to that because
but they can't make the
it's
connection.
More noise. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people that I'm talking to, that's not the thing that they're most concerned about. I think as we get into this election cycle, with Donald Trump, I don't know what is going to change. I think obviously people are going to hear more about it, but a lot of folks just want to tune out of that. It's just too crazy, Yeah. So.
And especially when there are some very basic things that rural areas need, like broadband that works. I heard you in an interview talking about kids having to do their homework in the parking lot of McDonald's just to get access to the Wi-Fi. And it made me very sad because it's like these are basic human rights, really, to have access to the internet. And then, of course, like the quality of water, which is also a problem, like
issue.
Drinking water. How can we expect anybody to kind of be activated about the stuff going on in Washington if you can't work and you can't drink clean water?
I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, but I think it's also like my job in running for Congress to be able to have a lot of those conversations, to be like, who, and this goes back to, again, with like the speakership, and it's like for 22 days, like who could just like, if a construction worker or, a carpenter didn't show up to a job for 22 days, would they still have that contract?
Yeah.
If a waitress was just like, well, I don't feel like coming in today. What's that restaurant going to do? Or a business owner, if they choose not to pay their employees, they just want to pay themselves, right? When you've got, the government on the brink of a shutdown, a farm bill still not passed, we've got to hold our elected officials accountable. And I think it's continuing to try to like bring that to light for people in this district, while offering them, an antidote to that, of somebody that is going to show up for their work, that is going to get things done for working families. You mentioned we have contamination in our water. There's a part of our district that water is getting brought into a community. Yeah. And that's ridiculous. It's
third world. It's uncivilized, and yet it's been normalized. I mean, look at Flint, Michigan. I mean, it's still going on despite all of the media attention. And yet it's almost as if the governor just doesn't have a conscience about that.
I think, I think for me, it's continuing to show up. And that's what I can say is there's so much work to do, and you need problem solvers that are going to do that. People that have real world experience. I haven't ever been in elected office before, but I think I've got a lot of skill sets to bring from running a small business myself, from being a waitress, from growing up on a dairy farm. There's all these things that I bring to a job to get things done. I don't have, this I'm not a career politician. And I think we need more people with skill sets in Congress that are going to be able to step up to solve some of these challenges, to bring some of these things to the table. And I think the work that I've been doing in getting around this 19 county district and hearing from people directly that are experts around like the PFAS that are in our water. I've had environmental roundtables. I've spent the time to learn about it. So then when I have the opportunity to create legislation, I know what to do. I'm not, jetting off to Israel like Derek Van Orden is to escape, a speaker vote and having to do his job. I'm showing up even on my campaign more than this guy is, if that makes sense. And so I think we need elected officials that aren't there for the political theater and for the political football. This isn't a game. These are people's lives. And I think continuing to make people in this district very aware of that, because they are focused on other things like living their lives and trying to provide for their families. And so it's a mix of that. And so, when you ask if they know about those things, they know about those things, but they don't really want to worry themselves about these things because they have real things to worry about, And so it's, you're asking a lot of questions about that, but I'm just people are trying to live their lives. And what we need to do is get leaders that want to help them do that and improve their quality of life. And I've brought that term up a lot today, but I think that that's what people want. They want folks that are going to make their lives better, not, create more wedges and divisiveness, because we already have enough of that. So
and get that minimum wage up as well. I mean, man, that is just,
yes. Isn't that wild?
It's insane.
And the $15 minimum wage used to be this very progressive viewpoint. Yeah. And now that's moved past, and it's right. I'm supportive of a $15 federal minimum wage, but I know Culver's, a fast food restaurant in my community, pays $20 already. So it's we've got a lot of work to do on that front too. And, I'd say one other thing that when I get there, getting the PRO Act passed, we had Act 10 in this state that Scott Walker put through that just undermined workers.
Right.
And, and it's important to me that unions have their power restored in this country.
Well, there's been a resurgence, hasn't there?
There has, absolutely.
With the auto workers and Joe Biden making a speech on the picket line, something that's never happened in history. And
I think
so
you're
very
seeing
powerful.
things change. I think you're seeing things change. Corporations can't continue to build record profits off the backs of their workers. They see it, they feel it, and they're stepping up to take on some of those challenges, and with the support of unions, being able to get the benefits and pay that they deserve.
I quoted Robert Reich recently on this show. I'll say it again. He said that record profits equals unpaid wages, and I think it's a good line to finish with. Okay, Rebecca, just tell us your website so people can support you and donate, or just keep an eye on your campaign.
Yeah, it's Cooke for Wisconsin, COOKEFOR Wisconsin, all spelled out. And you can check out my website. Like I said, I wrote my priorities page so you can really see what I'm about. I didn't talk about every single issue that I'm for while I was on the program today, but I also would really encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're very active. It's 19 counties wide, this district, and so you really get a feel for what we're doing and the kind of movement that we're trying to build to flip this seat back.
Okay, Rebecca Cooke, thank you very much for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News and download the daily 5-Minute News podcast. It drops every morning. You can hear me tell you what's happening around the world while you make a morning coffee. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5-Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.